Hey guys, welcome back. Today I have a very special treat for you. This engulfing candles price action set of indicators. There is an arrows indicator and a scanner indicator, and it will look for these patterns. It's also right here on the MQL5 marketplace, or you can get it directly from here on my website. It's for free. So let's get started. Here are all the extra indicators that are used by this arrows, and this is a sample template file. I'll go over the basic settings one by one, but let me first just talk about the patterns themselves. So the first pattern that we have is just a simple engulfing pattern. In here, suppose if we have a bearish candle, and right after that we have a bullish candle which engulfs that first candle. In that case we have a simple bullish engulfing pattern, and the reverse pattern would be a bullish candle first and then an engulfing bearish candle. And this is a setting first and last candle ratio. So suppose if this is 0.8, then it will check the engulfing candle. Suppose this is 100 points, then this one, the bearish candle, should at least be 80 points. In that case only then it will detect this pattern. So 0.8 by default is a very restrictive setting, and if you want even more signals then you need to keep this a little less restrictive, like maybe 0.4 right here. And it will look for this setting in other patterns as well. For example, this, let's talk about the second pattern, the sandwich engulfing pattern. In this, just like the previous pattern, we have a bearish and a bullish bar, but for sandwich there is a bullish bar, after that a bearish candle, and finally once again a bullish candle which engulfs that bearish candle. And over here also this setting will take effect. First and last candle ratio, over here it will actually check for this bearish candle and bullish candle ratio. So this setting actually checks for the engulfing bar and the opposite bar, and it will look for that ratio. The third pattern that we have is a 3-line strike pattern. So over here for the bullish pattern we first have 3 bearish bars and then a strong bullish bar which engulfs these, and for the opposite pattern we have 3 bullish soldiers, these bars, and after that we have a bearish bar which engulfs these. Now the engulf all soldiers setting, this is optional. By default it will be true, but if you set this to false, in that case suppose the bearish bar is right here and it does not engulf all 3, even then it will detect this pattern. But it's better to keep this as true because then it will have a stronger pattern. Now with 3-line strike we need to be careful, because once this pattern appears it will use this high of the final engulfing bar and the low, these areas, as support and resistance areas, and we need to actually, right here, we need to actually wait for one of these, either the support or the resistance, to be broken. Because right here suppose we have a bullish arrow but a very strong breakout bar breaks this support area. In that case price will go in the opposite direction. So with this 3-line strike, this pattern, just be careful that after this pattern occurs, wait for a few more bars to make sure that either that resistance is broken or that support is broken. And an added setting with this is this next pattern, which is called rising 3. So either it is a bullish rising 3, in which case it will use this same pattern, but it will look for a bullish bar right before these, and then once again a bullish bar, and the opposite it will look for a bearish bar and then the 3 soldiers, and after that once again a bearish bar. If this rising 3 is true, then it will look for this pattern, and if it is false, in that case it will only look for this pattern, and the bar before this one might be bearish or it might be bullish. That won't affect this pattern. So with 3-line strike, just be careful of these support and resistance areas, and after that signal occurs, most likely the resistance will be broken if it's an upward pattern, But sometimes if the support is broken, in that case be careful because price might go downwards. And the final pattern that we have is the morning or the evening star doji pattern. Here it will look for a bearish bar and this very small doji, and after that a bullish bar. Now this can be either bullish or bearish, that won't make a difference because this candle body will be very small. And you can also set the max height for this bar and usually just try to keep it very small. In that case this pattern would be much more effective. And you can also look for high volume bars around this bar. If this is true, in that case it will look for a high volume bearish bar and after that a high volume bullish bar. And the opposite, same way, a high volume bullish bar, then the doji, and after that a high volume bearish bar. And if this is false, in that case it won't check for that high volume bars. And there is also another setting where you can set if you want to check for high or medium volume bars, and if medium volume bars is false, in that case it will only look for high volume, and if medium is true, in that case it will look for medium or high volume bars. And if we have this last bar engulfs first bar, this will be true by default. In that case it will look for this bullish bar to engulf this bearish bar, and the opposite, same way, this bearish bar should engulf this one. Keeping this true will make this pattern even more powerful, but just know that all of these settings are very restrictive and these will give you fewer and fewer results. So if you are looking for scalping, in that case you can maybe keep these to false and you will get even more signals, and you can just scalp for the next few bars, but keeping these to true will give you a much longer signal. And this pattern will also detect an abandoned baby pattern. In that case this doji sometimes is very far from this, like there will be a bearish bar and then a doji right here and then a bullish bar. It will also detect patterns like that. I haven't put a separate pattern for this one because this check will automatically check for this one. Now using just these patterns alone, you will get a lot of signals, which is why it is best to use these with support and resistance areas, and for that we use NRTR. Now this check is also optional. So suppose you have this NRTR resistance line or NRTR support line, and this post explains this NRTR indicator in much greater detail. We are interested in this blue line and the shadow area, which is this distance between the support and this distance between the resistance and the shadow. If price enters within this shadow, like suppose the price high or the price low is within this shadow, and after that an engulfing pattern appears, only then it will use these patterns. So let me just show you this example. Right here we have this candle high within the NRTR shadow, which is why it is taking this engulfing pattern. But right here we have these other engulfing patterns as well. In that case it won't use those patterns. Like right here we have a bullish engulfing pattern, but it won't use that because this bar is not within the NRTR shadow. So if this is true, in that case it will limit the signals by a lot, but it will give you very great signals. And finally we have this SSL check. It will use the SSL indicator and it will check the current time frame as well as higher time frames for the ongoing trend, and you can set the number of higher time frames that it needs to check. If this is 2, in that case it will check for the current time frame and 2 higher time frames. It uses this indicator which is there in those extras that I showed you. And suppose the current time frame is M30, in that case it will check the M30 and it will also check H1 and H4 for the ongoing SSL trend, and it will only allow a signal if that signal direction matches the current trend. I'll talk about the win rate calculations, but all of these are explained in greater detail in this post. The common settings, all of my scalper indicators, the arrows and scanner dashboards, they have all of these settings as common settings. So you can check out this post to understand exactly how the win and loss percentages are calculated. So for this indicator, we have fixed stop loss and take profit, which are used if this fixed take profit is true. In that case, it will use these values for take profit. If this fixed stop loss is true, then it will use these values, and it won't use this stop loss extra in case of fixed SLTP. But if variable stop loss is there, in that case you need to keep these fixed SLTP to false. So it will use this variable stop loss, and it will put the stop loss at this NRTR line. And sometimes we prefer to keep stop loss slightly higher than the NRTR actual support resistance areas. In that case, you can define this stop loss extra in points exactly like this in this format, and then it will add those extras to this variable stop loss. This extra will not apply to the fixed stop loss. And if you have this variable stop loss, in that case you can set this TP ratio. So if this is 1.8, then in that case the take profit will be 1.8 times the stop loss. By default, I think this is something like 1.5, and if you want twice as much take profit, then you can keep this to 2. And you can just try out all of these settings using your scanner dashboard, so that it will show you the percentages of how effective your strategy is. So we already talked about this take profit ratio, and you can read these settings in much more detail. Right here we have the debug messages. So whenever a particular signal occurs, you will get this, and you will also get which pattern was detected for that signal. And in case a signal was ignored, in that case you will see something like this, the reason for why that signal was skipped. Min height, it means that the engulfing candle height is less than the minimum height that you specified. And max entry bar, sometimes the entry bar is already too long. In that case, you can specify a height that you would like, and it will show you this. And we have this, suppose if you have volume check to true, and if there is no volume or no shadow, in case price is not inside the NRTR shadow, if you have this NRTR shadow option set to false, in that case it won't check for this. And finally we have this no SSL on current, means that the current buy sell arrow direction, it does not match the SSL current trend. And if you have this HTF SSL, this X will actually be the time frame for which the SSL trend direction does not match. So you'll get something like this. Now I would suggest that you trade on M15 plus, and H1 will give you much better trades. But M1 and M5, they aren't very reliable because they have a lot of places where these engulfing bars occur. So I would suggest that you trade at least M15 and higher time frames. Okay, so let me just go to the scanner dashboard, and then we'll take a look at the arrows. So right here we have these settings. I have shared this TPL file in that extras section, so you can try that out. Right here, as we see in euro dollar, we are getting a good percent. So let's just take a look. So right now we are getting much closer signals, and in case if you want one signal to appear, and after that if you wanted to wait for a few bars and only then show the next signal, in that case you can set this wait bars setting. Right now we have wait bars as 0. If I set this to maybe 5, in that case you won't get signals too close together. So right here. And if you don't have a problem with really close together patterns, in that case you can always set this to 0. In that case you will get patterns even if they are close together. And right now we have the SLTP ratio as 1.5, and if I set this to 2, in that case you will get a much higher take profit right here. So just play around with that setting. As you can see, earlier we had 94% and we increased the take profit, so now we have 90, which is why I'll set that back to the default 1.5. And the stop loss is at NRTR. Let me put the NRTR on the chart, and I'll set this to 1.5. This is the ATR multiplier. and let me show you where the NRTR settings are. So right here we have the NRTR Shadow Check to true, and this one is the ATR period which will draw the actual NRTR, and we have this ATR multiplier. So this is what the NRTR looks like at 5. So I would suggest that you keep the default settings, or if you want even longer support resistance, in that case you can also increase that to something like 7. Right here the ATR multiplier, and I'll keep the shadow multiplier at 1.5. Same way over here, keep that to 7 and 1.5. So this changes the NRTR shadow like that. So if you have a higher ATR multiplier, in that case the support and resistance areas will be much stronger, but you will get fewer signals because the price will rarely enter the shadow area. So I would suggest sticking with the setting at 5. But you can just play around with the NRTR shadow and the shadow multiplier and the ATR multiplier. At 5 I think these are the best settings. And the next thing that I could show you is the SSL. These are the default settings, and let me hide the NRTR. On the default template I haven't shown the SSL and the NRTR because it hides all of these debug messages and it just overlaps with everything. So this is the trend that it uses for the SSL, this middle line. I just wanted to show you that. Let me go back to the original template. Okay, so let's just go over the settings one by one. So this is the prefix. Try to have a unique prefix because it uses this to draw all of these objects on the chart. And this one is the max passed bars. So it will calculate signals for these number of bars, and shift is where it will start the check. So since we have shift 1, it will ignore this candle which is still forming, and it will use this first candle. Next we have the signal expiry bars. So suppose after a signal occurs, if price does not hit the stop loss or the take profit, and if the number of bars after that signal reaches 60, in that case it will close the signal wherever it is. So suppose if I don't define a stop loss, if I have no stop loss, in that case it won't have a take profit either. So it will use these number of bars as expiry bars. So if I have that, in that case it will check for the price after 60 bars after that signal occurs. So I'll just put the stop loss back to NRTR, and in that case it will also have a stop loss and a take profit, and it will only use the signal expiry bars in case if it occurs before the SLTP was hit. We already talked about the fixed take profit and fixed stop loss. So these are very useful when you are scalping. If you only want price to move down a fixed number of points, in that case you can just set this, like we are on H1, so you can set something like this and keep the SLTP to true, and so in that case it will use those values and give you very tight stops, because for stop loss we have very small values. And this is the percent type. Right now by default it calculates the win points as the number of wins versus the number of losses in points, and it calculates this. But in case if you have the win count percent, in that case it will take the number of wins and the number of losses, and it will calculate the percent accordingly. But I would suggest that you keep it as points because we are more interested in knowing how many points we won or lost. We already talked about the stop loss, take profit, and right here we have the max entry candle. So this is the maximum point distance for a particular candle. So if I have a very low value over here, in that case it will only look for those bars. And sometimes if a bar is, suppose if we had a signal on this bar, in that case it will ignore those bars and you'll get a max height message right here. And this min height, the minimum height is right here. We can set the minimum height, like right now it will check that a candle height is at least 30 points. Then we have this check high volume bar for engulfing. If this is true, only then it will check whether that candle needs to be strong or medium candle volume. So if I have all of these as true, in that case it will make sure that the engulfing candle is at least a medium volume or a high volume candle. And this uses the volume candles EX4. So these green candles, these are high volume bullish candles, and red ones are high volume bearish candles. These purple ones, they are medium volume bearish candles, and these blue ones, they are medium volume bullish candles. So you can set these values. Right now I have kept it at false so that I will get even more signals. Keeping that to true will give you much fewer signals. Also remove this fixed SLTP. Next we have all of these patterns that we talked about earlier. This is the simple engulfing pattern. First it will actually check 3-line strike, sandwich, and this morning doji, morning or evening star doji patterns, and if it doesn't find any of these patterns, only then it will look for this simple candle engulfing, because these patterns, they occur a lot, and each of these patterns is actually in effect one kind of a simple engulfing pattern. So by default all of these pattern checks are true, and if you want the rising 3 pattern like we had talked about, where there is a bullish bar, 3 bearish bars, and then again a bullish bar, if you want this specific pattern, in that case set that to true. And if you want that final bar to engulf all of these soldiers, in that case set this to true. So engulf all soldiers, it will check for this bar engulfing all these 3 and not necessarily this one. So setting that, we get a much higher percent, we get a very good win rate, but we get slightly fewer signals. And you can just take a look at all of the patterns that occur. So right here we have the engulfing pattern. If you see engulf, that is just the simple engulfing pattern. And then we have, this is also the engulf pattern. Right here we have this doji pattern. This one is an evening star. Most of these patterns will be simple engulfing, and we actually get a lot of simple engulfing patterns, but most of those are cancelled out because it will look for NRTR shadow. So, and right here once again we have even more engulfing patterns which are within the NRTR shadow. And we discussed the NRTR. Now suppose the price type in shadow, by default it will check for the high or the low of that bar within the NRTR shadow, like right here, the high and the low of that bar. For a downward pattern it will check for the high, and for an upward pattern it will check for the candle bar low. But in case if you keep this to price open or price close, in that case it will check for the candle open or the candle close should be inside this shadow. That will give you even fewer signals if you keep this to price close. We already talked about SSL. And you can also use the max spread in case if you only want to trade pairs which have a very good spread, then you can set this to something like 10 or 15. In that case it will only work for those pairs which have a spread less than 10. By default it is 0, and 0 will skip this check. Next we have all of these ways to get the logs and pop-ups, and we have this, all of these can be used to customize these and the panel and to change the colors, etc. And the scanner and the arrows indicator, they share most of their settings as common settings. So in case if you make any changes to this one, suppose if I have actually made a change, and I can always save this set file. Let me save this to h1 new, and if I go back to the scanner, in that case I can load that set file. So it's just easier to make changes and to load them. And we get even better percentages. And suppose if you make a change to a set file, also make that same change to the template which you are using inside the scanner. So right now I have this TPL file, so whatever changes I made in the .set file, I will also save that template. And I usually like to keep the same template name. Like right now I saved this to new, so I usually like to keep the TPL and the SET files as same. And in that case I will use that new template name right over here. You can keep the .tpl or you can remove the .tpl. Either one is fine. And now if you click on any of these, in that case it will open that in the new window. And if you feel like all of these debug messages are too much, in that case you can always hide these debug messages. Right here, show debug text. If you keep this to false, then it will hide these debug messages and you will only get the arrow signals. And you will also get detailed journal logs which will show you exactly why a signal is skipped and for which bar. So this one is for the scanner. Let me just close that and let me reload the scanner. So you'll be able to see all of these pairs, and all of, like right now the scanner is scanning 5000 bars for each of these pairs, and you will see like a signal had occurred on this particular bar and also this particular bar for this pair and h1 time frame. And right here you get the exact reason for why that signal was skipped. So if you ever have any doubts on why a signal is not happening, just take a look at these log values for each of these pairs. Now all of my scanner settings are exactly the same for all scanners, so you can just go over the common scanner settings. The link is there in the blog post. So it will explain how you can set all of these time frames and pairs and all of these pop-ups, etc. And these settings, these are exactly the same as the arrows indicator, so you can use the set file, you can interchange the set files between them. So just play around with these settings like the NRTR settings or the SSL settings to change the trend, and that will show you exactly how well that strategy is working on your dashboard for whatever pairs you are interested in. And in case if you want to figure out these minimum and maximum distances, in that case use the crosshairs tool to calculate these distances. This second value which shows 290, that's the actual point distance, so that way you will see the exact bar height and you can set those distances. So yeah, just go over this detailed blog and let me know in case if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to help. And I really hope that you enjoy using this indicator, and let me know your comments. And if you find good settings, then please feel free to share them right here in the comments. And I really hope you enjoy using this. So thank you so much for watching, guys. Have an awesome day. Thanks, guys.